Dealing with the death of a loved one can be one of the most distressing, painful, and challenging experiences that we're ever going to go through. It can leave us feeling like we need help, but we don't know what to do. We don't know how to move forward. And it can feel like life has completely come to a standstill. And then there are all those unanswered questions. Why did this have to happen to them? Why now? Will the pain ever go away? What's happened to them? Where are they now? When we're in this situation, it feels like nothing can be done about it. And deep down, it feels like things are never going to be the same again. So this course aims to provide you with some guidance, to try and find a way to make sense of this whole situation, to learn new ways that we can manage the pain. And I'm sure you're going to be asking, can anything really be done about it? Well, the way I want you to think about it is when you have a wound, what do? Think about the last time you had a cut or a bruise. You apply some medicine. Maybe you put some cream to soothe the pain, and you put a plaster to nurse the wound. Well, I want you to think about the death of your loved one as an emotional wound. And whenever this happens, you only have two options. You can either leave it alone to let it heal over time, or you can apply a medicine. And the medicine that we're going to use is higher wisdom as a way to soothe the pain that we're going through. There's an ancient belief that when you're going through a trauma, it's like we're being hit by two arrows. The first arrow is the event that's happened, but the second arrow, the one that pains the most, is our mental reaction to that event. Now, spiritual wisdom doesn't aim to deal with the first arrow. We all know that events in life, difficult events happen, but they can't be changed. But wisdom can be applied to deal with that second arrow, our mental reaction. Because even though the events can't be changed, it's our perspective that can be changed. And we're going to be using sacred verses from a spiritual text known as the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. And throughout this course, I'm going to be referring to it as the Guru or the enlightened wisdom. Because if we use this wisdom, we can try to change our thoughts. And when we change our thoughts, we can change our reality. Not the event, but our reaction to that event. This course is arranged over 4 lessons where we use spiritual wisdom to help us answer these really important questions. Why do I feel so much sadness? Why did my loved one leave me? Will the pain ever go away? How do I move forward? Now, this course can be taken by yourself, but I think it's more beneficial for you to take these lessons in a group where there are other like-minded individuals around you who can also offer their guidance and their practical advice about how they dealt with this situation. Either way, I encourage you to take your time with these lessons. You may want to watch them a few times to make sure that you've absorbed what's being taught. And at the end of each lesson, try to answer the questions to see how you can apply this wisdom in your own life and to help you process your grief. So let's begin. One of the most common feelings that people have is when they say, I can't stop missing them. I can't stop thinking about them. Everything I look at reminds me of them. So what do I do? And when we ask people, we seem to get a lot of conflicting advice. Some people tell us, hold your head up high. Don't cry. It'll be okay. And yet there are others that say it's perfectly natural to let it all out, to feel whatever you're feeling. However we're grieving, it's so important that we realize that this really isn't a question of right or wrong. But at some point, you may want to ask yourself this question. Am I ready to deal with the pain. Because if I don't, I can end up avoiding it or running away from it. Sometimes we suppress our pain, and when we do, then there's a danger that we experience a prolonged period of suffering and mental agony. And sometimes this can last a lifetime. And I know that things can be quite confusing. There are so many emotions that we experience. If people ask us how we're feeling, it can be so difficult to explain or to describe what we're going through. So this lesson is all about trying to understand our feelings, trying to put words to those difficult emotions that we may be experiencing that we just don't know how to explain. So let's explore our emotions. In this first lesson, what I thought would be useful would be to just go through and try to describe all the different emotions that we may be feeling. Sometimes when we don't know how to explain them, it can be helpful just to put words to these difficult emotions. And you may find it useful to actually write them down, but at no point do I want you to judge yourself. We're going to try to heal through understanding ourselves, not by placing a judgment on whether we should or we shouldn't be going through these. And this list of emotions isn't in any sort of order. So let's start with sorrow. We can experience such a deep sense of sorrow, separation, and longing, where we feel that every single day is a struggle. And what we're going through there is a loss. We're feeling the loss of companionship, that closeness that you had with your loved one. You'd remember all the joys that you went through. You're feeling the loss of that security of just having them around, because when they were around, it felt like everything was going to be okay. And when we have this loss, it can end up feeling like our life is meaningless. I've heard people refer to it as just being numb. Life is empty. I feel stuck. Sometimes we might think that we don't even feel human anymore. I've got no motivation to interact with the world. I feel totally disconnected. And at different times, you may feel angry. You may feel hurt, resentment, feeling like life has somehow cheated you. You didn't deserve to go through this. Your loved one didn't deserve what happened to them. There's such a big question around why. Why did they die? And blame is often the thing that comes after anger. You can feel like you want to be angry at something or someone. Sometimes we vent our anger at life itself, towards God. Sometimes if our loved one has been through an accident, we want to blame the doctors. We want to blame the driver of the other car, the government for not putting the right things in place to keep your loved one safe. Sometimes we blame our loved ones. Why did you leave me? Why did you cause me so much pain? We can also feel angry at our friends and family that come round to try and help. Sometimes they're trying so hard to fix the problem and nothing they do can help us feel any better. Do you find at times that you just want to be left alone? And then there is self-blame. You can feel regret for all the things that were never done. Did I spend enough time with them? Did I tell them how I felt? Sometimes you feel such a sense of guilt that you didn't do enough. You didn't do what could be done to protect them. Sometimes we go through worry, where we feel uncertain about how we're going to manage our life right now. How are we going to live without them? And this can be really tricky if the other person was supporting you in some way, supporting you financially or even emotionally. And at times we're going to feel alone. We're going to feel like nothing is ever going to be the same anymore. No one else is going to be around who could do what they did, who could provide what they did in your life. Nothing is ever going to replace that lost love. Now, there are a few more emotions that we're going to be talking about. But right now, I want you to pause this lesson and write down the 2 or 3 emotions that you're really struggling with. It could be the ones that we've talked about already. And think about if there are any other emotions that we may have missed. So do it now, and when you're ready, start the lesson again. When you look at that list, you might be wondering, why do we go through so many different emotions when we're grieving? And it comes down to the fact that between you and your loved one, an emotional bond was created, a closeness that now seems to be broken. Think about it. You don't mourn somebody who you've never known or never met. On average, they say that on any given day, 164,000 people have died. That means on the day that your loved one died, almost 164,000 people also died. But we don't mourn their death. In fact, somebody who lived down your own street may have died, but if you don't know them, it doesn't seem to hurt that much. We're only mourning that one person because now there's a bond that's been broken. And this is such a major change in our life that it can be really difficult to adjust. And it's completely natural to experience this wide range of emotions. Because really what we're doing is we're struggling. We're struggling to let go. It feels like we're being forced against our will to break a relationship that we didn't want broken. And then there is the worry of what it's going to be like to move forward. A lot of us have a misconception that moving forward is about forgetting them. We feel that grieving is the only correct response because that's the way that we show that we still love them, that we still hold on to them, that they're still dear to us, and we're continuing on their memory. We worry that sometimes we forget what it was like having them around, and that leaves us feeling really guilty. And we don't want the guilt of not remembering them. We don't want to feel like we're dishonoring them, like we're losing our connection, because that leaves us really vulnerable. And this is where fear comes in. We're afraid of letting go. We're afraid that moving on is going to a place that's unknown to us. And sometimes it can just be more comfortable to stay in grief, to stay holding on to the memory of them. So let's make one thing really clear. The goal is not to forget them. We're not trying to delete them from our life. The goal is to get to a point where we can remember without pain, where every time we think about them, we have a smile on our face, where we can have a sense of gratitude for just having them in our life. And I know that that can seem like a faraway goal. And sometimes all we want to know is, how do I manage my emotions now? What do I do when I'm lost in this whirlwind of emotions? And sometimes it doesn't even just feel like a mental pain. Sometimes it's a physical pain in our heart, where we can feel it in our chest and we can't even take a deep breath properly. You know, there may be moments when you wake up in the morning and just for a second, your mind seems clear. And then all of a sudden, the memories of the pain start flooding back in. So whenever you feel overwhelmed, I want you to take a breath, slow your breathing down, and just do one thing. Remember the blessings that your loved one had in their life. Just try to remember one amazing thing that you're grateful for that they got to experience. In fact, do it right now. Pause this lesson and write down 2 or 3 blessings that they had in their life. And when you're doing that, think about what would they have said was a blessing in their life? What are the things that they had that you're really thankful for? Now, in the other lessons, we're going to be looking at more ways that we can manage the pain. But for now, I want you to have a look at these questions and either write down the answers or discuss them in your groups. What emotions are you most uncomfortable with right now? What gives you comfort these days? How are your family and friends responding to your loss? What blessings in your loved one's life are you most thankful for? In this lesson, we seek to answer one of the most difficult questions. Why did our loved one leave us? And this is where the spiritual wisdom has an important message to teach us. Death is not a punishment. Death is not your enemy. And sometimes it can feel like this huge injustice that's happened to us. Death can feel like something that we need to fear before it happens. And when it happens to our loved ones, it's just something that we need to tolerate. And this is because we've been conditioned from a young age that birth is good and death is bad. Society has trained us to think that receiving is better than losing. And because we think like that, we naturally want to hold on to pleasure forever. And we want to run away from pain as much as possible. And what this does is this creates an imbalance within our mind. It's like only wanting the sun to rise and never wanting it to set. I grew up in a home where I was told to never discuss death. It's almost as though if you brought it up in conversation, you were going to invite the force of death into your home. But I've always felt that death doesn't need my invitation. And the wisdom of Guru Granth Sahib teaches a similar message. It says, Marna Murat Puchya, Puchi Tit Navar. Death never asks the time, nor the date or day of the week. So what the wisdom is teaching us is that death shouldn't be avoided. It's an inevitable truth that needs to be understood and even embraced. But often we ask, but why did this happen now? Why did it happen to them? Why do the good people seem to die? We want to have reasons for why we're going through this trauma in our life. Is it something to do with our past karma? Could their destiny have been changed in some way? And to this, the wisdom teaches us that death really is a mystery. It really is unknown why it acts the way it does. But what it teaches us is death isn't something to be avoided. In fact, it's a necessary law of nature. What we learn is that nothing would exist without death. I'm reminded of a time where I was driving my car on the highway and I went past a car scrapyard. And while I was driving past, I thought about the very first car that I had ever owned. And I was thinking, I wonder where that car is now. It's so old that surely it's not around in that same shape or that same form. But then as I was thinking about it, it made me realize that all the parts of the car must still exist somewhere. All the metal, the plastics, the rubber, the glass, they couldn't have disappeared. They can't have gone anywhere. Somehow, somewhere, they're still here. It made me realize that the same truth can be applied to us. All of our atoms that our body is made from is borrowed from nature. Think about all the food that you eat, whether it's plants or animals. All of the things that you eat have gone into your body and have made it what it is right now. So death is necessary for us to survive. The very reason that we're alive is because we are reliant on the death of the food, the plant, the animal that we've eaten, in order to keep us alive. And this gives us a better perspective about what death really means in life. When we think like this, we realize that our loved one hasn't disappeared, but in fact, they've just returned home to where they came from. Temporarily, there was a life force that was in their body, but now their body has gone back into the earth. Their breath has gone back into the air. All their fluids in the body have gone back into the oceans. And their life energy merges with the life energy that's all around us. When we understand life like this, we realize that death is not our enemy. It's simply a transition. It's the universe changing from one form to another. And we realize how important it is to have death all around us. It's like trying to understand that the sun has to set in order for the stars to come out at night. And then that transitions into another sunrise. And so the sunrise is not against the sunset. In fact, they just complement each other. You know, at home, I have these apple trees growing in my back garden. And for just a few short weeks a year, these beautiful pink and white flowers appear. And I'm always a little bit sad when the flowers die and disappear. But then I realize that those flowers have to die in order for the apples to grow. And when we think like this, we begin to understand that this is all just a beautiful cycle that all of us are in. We're all a part of this system. Now the question is, can we accept this process of the universe? Can we understand that we're part of a system that's far bigger than we can comprehend? Because as long as you hold on to the pain, you're holding on to a feeling that you've been wronged somehow. And when we do this, we're denying death. We're saying that we only want life. And this is an imbalance.
Have you found that spiritual teachings are great to learn, but not always easy to apply to your own life? Sometimes we all need a bit of support and guidance from people who know what we're going through and can help us find some answers. The Nanak Naam Facebook group helps you do just that. It's an online community where you can ask any questions about life and get answers from other members of the group. Search for Nanak Naam Community Support and join our free Facebook group today.
If you held a funeral for your loved one, then I want you to understand that that was an important, symbolic ceremony. A ceremony where you are handing back your loved one, returning them back to life. If you buried your loved one's body, or you spread their ashes out in nature, what you were doing was you were acknowledging that they were a gift that you had to borrow for a short period of time. But at the end, they needed to be returned. But always remember that your loved ones are still here. In a different way, in a different form. Their life energy is all around you. Their body has transitioned into a different form. Every time you see a new baby, new flowers, birds flying up above, this is your loved one. This is the energy of your loved one. Their life energy is in all these beautiful things around you. So they haven't gone anywhere. In fact, they are everywhere. So I hope that you can take comfort in this important wisdom. Death is not a punishment. Death is not your enemy. Have a go at trying to answer these questions, either by writing them down or discussing them in your groups. Which practices and ceremonies have you found useful to come to terms with the death of your loved one? Are you able to see your loved one's funeral as a step towards your healing. What is the most difficult time of day or week for you, and why? On our own personal journey of bereavement and grieving the loss of a loved one, there inevitably comes a point where we wonder to ourselves, will this pain ever go away? And so in this lesson, that's what we're going to be looking to try to answer. When I travel around, I often meet people who within the first few minutes of speaking to me say something like, hey, 10 years ago I lost my father. And for a lot of us, this is a reality, that we can hold on to the trauma of the death of our loved one for a really long time. It's almost as though that's how we see ourselves now. We begin to identify ourselves as the person who lost a loved one. And we're going to have to at some point ask this question, and it can be a difficult question. How long do I want to carry this pain? Is this pain serving me? If we look at how modern psychology looks at grief, it generally breaks it down into 5 stages. It talks about grief having a process, which isn't necessarily linear, but there are all of these 5 different elements that we will go through. So let's have a look at that quickly. The first stage is denial. And this is when the shock of the death first hits you. And sometimes we don't want to deal with it straight away. And we keep ourselves busy. And what we're doing is we're really just demonstrating our fear at that moment, fear of dealing with the pain of this immense loss that we're feeling. Another stage is anger, where you can be angry at life and God. You can also reach a stage of bargaining where you're just pleading, please, let the situation change. You're praying to the universe that you want them to come back. Another part of grief is experiencing the depression of that loss, where you begin to realize that you're helpless and you're unable to change the scenario. And then the final stage, which is acceptance. And that's really the point at which healing starts. What's interesting when we look at these 5 stages and compare them to the spiritual wisdom, we realize that the spiritual wisdom only looks at acceptance. In fact, the spiritual wisdom says that acceptance is the first and only stage to healing and learning how to deal with the loss of our loved one. And that can often be the hardest one for us to start to tackle, because a lot of the times the reality is we say, I'm not ready. I wasn't ready to lose them. For some of us, we're still hoping, waiting for them to walk through that door again, looking at our phone and hoping that they're going to call one day and tell us that this was all a dream, that this nightmare is now over. So death can be a major adjustment for us. And sometimes we don't want to deal with it. Sometimes we just want to retreat into our own little world, shut the outside world out and go into ourselves, go into a cave. And what we do there is we stay within the pain, and that's okay. What that pain is really showing us is that we're still not prepared. We weren't prepared when our loved one went away, and we're still not ready right now. And some of you may be thinking, well, can you ever really prepare? Can you ever be ready to lose your loved ones? And this is where the spiritual wisdom teaches us that yes, you can. In fact, the whole of the wisdom of oneness, the wisdom of understanding how life and death works, is about seeing it as a package. You can't have life without death. But this isn't how we talk. This isn't how we function in the normal world. Let's look at some of our expectations of how we see death. A lot of the time, our expectation is that people are only supposed to die when they're old. Death only happens to old people, or it should only happen when we grow old. Everybody should have the right to live to a ripe old age. But this isn't the reality. And when the reality hits us and completely breaks away from our expectation of life, that's when we begin to really suffer and see how unprepared we were to face death at a time when it doesn't suit us. And it just begins to show that we are unwilling to accept an absolute truth about death, and that is that death happens at any time. And this is particularly true when we lose somebody when they're young, when we perceive the death of someone else as being untimely, especially when the death is very sudden. I wonder if you've ever noticed how eagles and hawks fly around. When I look outside of my bedroom window, it backs onto these open fields and farmlands. And very often I will see these hawks flying around, and it's very fascinating to me that they will circle around for quite a while, sometimes hovering in the air, and you never quite know when they're going to swoop down and catch their prey, and it always takes you by surprise. And this is kind of how death works. Death is like that hawk that's hanging over our head, hanging over the heads of everyone, and at any time it can strike us down. There's a beautiful verse in the Guru Granth Sahib by a Sufi master known as Sheikh Farid. And this verse is recorded where he talks about this nature of death striking at any time. He says, Farida dariyave kanne bagla baitha kel kare. On a riverbank, the crane sits and plays joyfully. While it plays, a hawk suddenly pounces on the crane. Once the hawk strikes it, then all play is forgotten. That death, which the mind had never considered, the Lord has made a reality. And in this verse, Sheikh Faridji is showing us how we live our life. He talks about us as being the crane, and a crane is a really interesting bird because in other verses of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, it talks about how the crane pretends to be holy, sits by the bank of a riverside like a meditating yogi, but really what he's doing is he's keeping his eye on the fish and he's being really still in order for him to pounce and grab the fish. And here the crane represents that same mentality that we have, that our whole way of looking at life is trying to grab anything and everything that we can. We live our life as though we're here to gain as much as possible, but we're never aware that above our head is the hawk of death, and at any time death can strike us down. And so when we start to understand this, we begin to realize one of the fundamental truths about life and death that spiritual wisdom teaches us. And that simple truth is that death waits for no one. But this isn't something that we like to talk about. And in fact, when we look at our grieving, we realize that the words that we use tend to often favor what I call pain language. We never really talk about death as though it's a fundamental truth of life. So let's look a little bit about how we use our language, how the very words that we use may be harming us even further, maybe making the grieving process more difficult for us. And spiritual wisdom, remember, is always about that second arrow, about how do we change our mindset? How do we change the way we think and the way that we talk about life and death? Think about when we lose someone elderly in our life. What are the kind of words that we say? We say things like, oh, they lived a long life. They had a good life. And so what we're doing straight away is we are using languages that show that we're okay. We understand. We understand that they lived a good life. We understand that they lived a long life. Remember how I said that the expectation that we all have is that you're only supposed to die when you're older. And when we lose an elderly loved one, And even though it can be painful to lose a parent or a grandparent, there's a part of us that understands and has always accepted that this is how it is. This is how life works. And so what we do is we're demonstrating that we were prepared. We understood that this is what happens to us in old age. And so when we're prepared, we grieve slightly less. The pain is slightly less. Now let's look at how we speak when we lose someone who is younger. Look at the pain language. Look at the words that we say. We say, "Oh, it's such a shame. They've gone too soon. It wasn't their time." And so this pain language that we use is all around the mentality that something has gone wrong. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. But wisdom teaches us that this is not the truth. The truth is that people's death, whether we perceive it to be too early or too soon, whenever it happens, whether they're old or young, it's never against life's plan. It was always part of the plan of life that people come and go at times that we can't expect. So death is never against life's plan. It's only against our own plan. And it's really important that we begin to adopt a healthier language as part of our grieving process. The words that we need to start using is quite simply, death can and does happen at any time. And when we start to do this, we begin to move closer towards acceptance. We begin to use language that shows that we ourselves are now understanding how life and death works. And it's easy to talk about this acceptance, but real acceptance starts when we have one fundamental realization: that the death of our loved one is not a problem that you can solve. It isn't something that's going to go away. And you only really have two options. Either we can resist it and prolong the pain for as long as we want, or we can start to accept it. And this acceptance means total surrender. Surrendering to how life works. If you've ever been to an Indian funeral, you'll notice something strange that happens. When the body of the deceased is brought forward, a lot of the times people will start bowing their heads towards the loved one. And at times you might be looking at this and thinking, well, why? Why are they bowing down? And what they do is not bow down to their loved one. What's happening at that moment is that people are being presented with death. They're being faced with the power of death. And when you see this great force of death right in front of you, there's no other thing that you can do but be humbled in front of it. Be humbled in the presence of death. Because ancient cultures have always recognized that there's a sacredness to death. What they realize is no matter who you thought you were, whether you are rich or poor, whether you're successful or famous all around the world, there is a master that powers us all. Death is like a master that has the strength to overpower all of us. And when you see that, you can only bow down. You can only bow your head in front of this supreme power in absolute humility and say, this is how life works. You are bowing down to a power that has the ability to create life and to take life away as well. And so when we talk about surrender, we're beginning to start to understand that acceptance means that I understand that I don't have any control. I thought I had control over the smaller things in life, but there are just some things that are so much bigger. But we can do this, can't we? Sometimes we can say, I understand that. I understand that I can't control death. I've always known that. But I can still be bitter about it. There can still be a part of me that says, I don't like it. I didn't want it to happen. But I accept. I accept that I don't have any control. And this kind of language is something that we need to be careful of, because the sentiment behind it is, you win, I lose. I've failed in this battle against life and death. I failed to look after my loved one. I did something wrong, and I'm not able to be in control of how life and death works. And so there's a bitterness to the language that we're using, and that's not really what acceptance and surrender is all about. True surrender is that moment where you wake up and you say, I get it now. I didn't realize how life and death worked, but now I'm beginning to understand. I understand your system. I understand the way you work. My loved one is not someone who was taken away from me. The death of my loved one is simply the point at which life had to be handed back. They had to be returned home. And they were always destined to go back. It's just that I didn't realize. So when we can surrender is the point at which we can say, I realize, I know now how you work. And that is a point at which there is zero resistance. Acceptance is the point at which you can now look at the death of your loved one without pain, where you no longer say that I resist you, I'm denying you, I don't want you to be there anymore. It's like the fish who at one point realizes the scale of the ocean that he's in and says, I'm no longer going to fight you anymore. You're far too big for me. I'm just a tiny little fish in this vast ocean of life. And so this is what total surrender means. It's about letting go. And I know that that sounds really scary, but it's about trying to get into a state of relaxation with life. Totally relaxed with how life works. No longer putting your guard up, no longer thinking that life is about me fighting with it, me fighting for control. It's that fish that says, I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to swim in whatever direction you're going to take me because I can't swim in any other way. You are always going to flow in this direction. And this isn't how we work. It's so natural when we lose a loved one for us to focus on the pain, for us to have this natural longing for them to come back. And the wisdom is teaching us that we need to learn how to change the lens that we use to see life, the perspective that we're looking at life and death with. And that is not with the lens of pain. And when we do this, it slowly begins to allow us to stop focusing on the pain. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, well, that all sounds great, but what do I do right now? And this is something that you can do right now. You don't have to wait for this to come into your life. It starts with a decision. And the decision says that I'm no longer going to be against life and death. I'm no longer going to be a victim of this death because life and death come as a package. I'm now going to flow in harmony with it. And it's never too late to start. There's no point at which you need to think, well, is now the right time? It's never too early or too late. You can start doing this at any point. There's no certain amount of time that needs to pass before you begin to make that decision in your life that you're no longer going to be a victim. And by doing this, the pain isn't magically going to disappear overnight, but it is a small step. And it's the right step, the step to take towards surrender. But surrender to what? Surrender to whom? What we're surrendering to is to the life force. Well, what is this life force? Well, whenever we want to know what this life force is, we can look within ourselves. Are you breathing right now? Or is that life force breathing for you? Think about your heartbeat. It's beating all the time, even when we're sleeping. Are you doing that? Or is there a life force that is just there with you all that time? You're not doing these things. When you cut yourself and you notice that the skin starts to heal itself, the body starts to repair itself. Are you doing that? Or is there a life force inside you that's doing that? This same life force that's within you is all around you. The same life force that's within every single person that we know, all of our loved ones, all of our friends and family, all of nature has this life force inside of it. And so even in our grieving process, there'll be times where we feel alone. And the wisdom teaches us that we're never alone. This life force is our real friend. And in fact, this is the relationship that you need to build. Build a relationship with that force that's inside you, that's within you and all around you, that has the power to create and take life away. This is the master that we bow down to, but we're unaware of it. We like to pretend that it doesn't exist. We like to think that we're in control of everything. And when we begin to spend more time with this wisdom, with the wisdom that I call the Guru, when we spend a lot of time with this enlightenment mindset, it begins to start helping us to heal. And this is what the Guru's words do. This is what Kirtan does, which is singing the Guru's words, constantly reminding yourself of this message. And when we do this, we begin to slowly start entering into peace, and we stop resisting what is inevitable in all of our lives. When I meet people who are grieving, one of the most common questions that I hear is, which prayer should I read? And my answer is always the same. Pray for the wisdom to accept and remember the force of life, to understand how it works. And this is really something that we should be doing every day, to remind ourselves that life is in control. And if it helps, you can start to use life mantras, and they can be simple words of wisdom. Words like, I accept your ways. I remember that you are in control, and I surrender to your power. And when we start doing this, what we start to do is to change our words. And changing our words is about changing our thoughts, moving away from pain language to a language of acceptance. And this is so powerful in helping us grieve. Let's look at some examples of pain language that we commonly use during the grieving process. And let's see if we can think about how we can turn those into some acceptance words. Instead of saying, they were taken away from me, how about we say, they were returned home to where they came from? Instead of, it was not their time, it was too soon, we say, it was their time, we just didn't know. Here are some more examples of pain language that we use. Can you write down your own ideas of how you can turn them into acceptance words? They've left me. I'm all alone. I can't live without them. I need them to come back. It's so unfair. Once you're done writing down your ideas, have a go at answering some of these questions. Again, you can write down your own answers or discuss them in your groups. What are some other examples of pain language that you can think of? And how can you adapt them into acceptance words? How can you practice surrendering to a higher power in your day-to-day life? Does understanding the importance of acceptance change how you view your healing process? In this lesson, we're going to try to answer the question, what are the next steps that I need to take to help me move forward? There's an ancient spiritual analogy that talks about a tree with two birds. One of the birds is sitting lower down and the other is sitting quite high up in the tree. The bird that's lower down spends all of his time jumping around and enjoying all the pleasures of the tree, being enamored by the various colors and sights and sounds, enjoying the flowers and all the different pleasures that the tree has to offer. And because he's jumping around and moving around so much, inevitably every now and then he gets hurt. And every time he gets hurt, he looks up and he sees the bird sitting higher up on the tree. And the bird that's higher up doesn't move around so much. He's just sitting there in bliss, enjoying this one fruit. And the bird that's lower down says, I'd really like to be like that higher bird. But then sure enough, a couple of minutes later, that bird that's sitting lower down is distracted again and moves around enjoying all the pleasures of the tree. And what I love about this story is that it represents the two ways that we can live life. We all want to live in bliss and harmony, but we don't really know how. And our mind is like the lower bird. We're constantly distracted by what the world has to offer us. And every now and then we get hurt. Every now and then we receive a trauma, or life changes or does something in a way that makes us take a step back and think about what our life is really going to be like. What should our life be? And we look at the higher way of looking at life. We look at those people who seem to have it all figured out, who are blissful, who are calm. And we think, how do I get some of that in my life? How do I become like that higher bird? And that higher bird represents a higher mindset. The one that is still in the tree. That person who's still in the world, but isn't lost by it, knows how to live, how to play the game of life, knows how to just enjoy the fruit of life without necessarily getting completely entangled by all the different distractions of life. And we want this in our life. We want to be like that higher bird. We want to have that higher way of thinking, but a lot of us are afraid. We think, I don't really want to live like a monk. So how do we do this? How do we have a full life? How do we have fulfilling relationships and friendships and enjoy our hobbies and our pleasures? Well, this is what that higher bird is. The bird that's in the tree. And it's representing that we can still live in this world, but not be completely distracted. And when he's enjoying that one fruit, it shows that he is focused on a higher way of living. He's got a wisdom to him, and that's the wisdom that we need to try to understand. And the wisdom that the higher bird lives by is quite simply that I'm here, but nothing around me is going to last. All of these pleasures are fine, but this isn't the real fruit of life. This isn't the real juice of life that I'm here to receive. You know, sometimes when I go to the shops, I see a sign outside the store that says, closing down sale, everything must go. And I love that sign because to me, that's one of the best mantras of life. It's a reminder that that's really how life works. Everything must go. Everything in life that we have around us is one day going to leave us. And so it allows us to understand that when we focus on things around us that are temporary, they can only ever give us temporary happiness. And this isn't who we want to be. We want to be like that higher bird. And that higher bird is one who is comfortable with letting go. Comfortable with being in the tree of life, but not necessarily lost in it. And this is not how we've been taught how to live life. We've been taught that life is all about achieving, about gaining as many things as possible. And so we try to constantly collect things. We think that if we collect more things in life, that's how we're going to be more happy. And life has shown us time and time again that this isn't how it works. Things that we collect aren't going to last. And this is the truth that spiritual wisdom has always tried to teach us, that you can't hold on to things forever. Nothing ever lasts. Think about every single day that you've experienced. How many of those days have you been able to keep? You may be able to take photos, you may be able to capture your memories, but every single day has always had to be given back. Think about your breath. Even your breath, one that comes in has to be given back again. Every inhale turns into an exhale. I'm always surprised when people take so much pride and joy in their birthdays. It's as though we believe that by getting 1 year older, we've gained something more in life. And I like to think that you're actually losing every single day. Every birthday, every year that you celebrate, you're losing something. In fact, you're at the oldest on the day that you were born. That's when you have the most amount of life left. And every single day and every year that you have a birthday after that, that's when you're getting one step closer. You're losing time. You're getting closer to death. We don't like to think about life in that way. We want everything to stay the same. We want life to be static. And what this does is this gives us this false sense of permanence. And we need to start getting comfortable with the idea that life is constantly changing. We need to be living in harmony with this flow of life. Think about life like a river. It's always moving, it's always flowing and always changing. So we need to become more comfortable with change. And in fact, this is what you've been doing your whole life. You've experienced so many changes before, and each time you've shown the strength to move forward. When you were younger, you may have changed from one school to another. When you grew up, you moved from one job to another and changed your career. You may have moved home, moved into a new neighborhood, or some of us have even moved to other countries. There is so much change that we've experienced, even in our relationships. How many friends have come and gone? How many friendships and relationships have ended? But that gave rise to new relationships and new friendships that have started. There may have been a time in your life when you were single, and another point in your life when you were married. A time when you had no children, and another time when you became a parent. Change is inevitable. And this is the same approach that I want you to take in all of your relationships. I want you to start looking at every single relationship as short-lived. And when we do this, we begin to understand that there is no person that we own, and there is nobody that we get to keep. Even your own body needs to be returned someday. And when we don't think like this, we make the mistake of placing our hopes on other people being around, relying on them being there in order for us to be happy. And what we do is we're creating this false sense of stability, this hope that there is permanence in life when there isn't. I know that when we're grieving, it can be inconceivable to even think about breaking those bonds with our loved ones. But the truth is, the longer that we hold on to our attachments, the longer we try to control the situation, the more it's going to cause our pain. I want to share with you something that I do in my own life. Every day when I leave for work or I drop my kids to school, I make a mental note that this could be the last time that I see my wife or my children. And what this allows me to do is to realize how temporary and fragile life really is. But this sort of acceptance only really starts when we become comfortable with the idea that we ourselves one day are going to die. One of the things that I do every single morning when I wake up is I repeat to myself, today could be the day that I die. And I know that if I say that to myself every single day, one day it's actually going to come true. I just don't know when. Now, I know you may be thinking that that's a really morbid, depressing, or pessimistic way to look at life. But that's not been my experience. When you're aware of the reality that you're going to lose everything around you, you gain something amazing. You gain the divine perspective. You gain this freedom, this bliss that comes from knowing that everything around you is temporary. And in fact, this is how we're going to practice this wisdom. It really isn't too late to start. For you to understand that every single day is something to be cherished is a great and healing, powerful way for you to move forward in your own life. When you understand that every person that you're going to come across is someone who you need to cherish in that moment. In fact, when we realize that every single breath is one that has to be given away, then we start to see it as a blessing. We start to realize that every single moment is a gift, because we're aware that death is flying around and hovering over our heads, and at any time it can come down and take us or the people around us. And it's so easy when we are mourning the loss of our loved ones to focus on those who have gone. And when we do that, we can actually ignore the people that we still have around us. We take them for granted. And when you do that, you make the same mistake again of assuming that they're also going to be around forever, that there is this false sense of stability or permanence in your life. And this isn't the way the wisdom teaches us to focus on relationships. The wisdom shows us that all relationships will come to an end. The death of your loved one now becomes a moment of awakening. Their death is like a loud alarm clock that's going off, waking you up, reminding you that you placed your hopes in the wrong thing. You relied on your loved one being there all the time, and as long as they were there, that's how you were going to be happy. But in the end, that relationship did not last. So instead, we need to place our hopes on a higher truth. And that truth is that nothing will last, and we need to cherish every single moment that we have. Cherish every relationship that we have. Each morning that we wake up isn't something that we should take lightly. In fact, we should be grateful for this miracle of life that we get to experience. When you're grieving, missing your loved one shouldn't mean missing out on life. And you know, it's okay. It's okay to want joy in your life, to want hope, to look forward to new relationships. And none of this means that you're being disloyal to your loved one. And when you're grieving, you're going to have setbacks. There are going to be times where you're going up and down on this emotional roller coaster. And that's okay too. Every time we experience pain, it doesn't mean that we have to start all over again. It just means that for a moment, we want to crawl back into our cave and close ourselves from the outside world, because that's a familiar place to be. And that's okay for a short while. But at some point, we need to let that light back in, that light of higher wisdom. Because our loved one's journey may have come to an end, but we shouldn't let that stop us from missing out on whatever time we have left. Have a go at answering the following questions, either by writing down the answers or discussing them in your groups. Do you feel that you allow yourself to have good days where the pain is lessened? Name some other major changes in your life that you had the strength to overcome. What does the future without your loved one look like for you? Has your experience of this group helped you? If so, how? I really hope that you've been able to benefit from some of the wisdom that we've shared in this series. Grief can be such a personal journey, and it's important that we take our time with it and that we don't judge ourselves. There are going to be times when we feel like discussing our emotions with a group, and there are going to be other times where we just want to be left alone, and that's okay too. If it helps, feel free to watch these lessons again and again in your own time. And I hope that you can use the wisdom of the Guru to guide you back to a place of peace and love within your own heart.